I've always been really into puzzles. And really what a contract negotiation is a big puzzle.
Hello, everyone. It's time for another episode of the Ramos Law Difference Makers podcast, where I, your host, Dr. Jim Hoven, get a chance to meet cool people, interesting people, amazing people doing things and making a difference every single day. Some at the individual human level, some at the corporate level. And today, my guest is attorney Tyler Robbins. His story is amazing. How he got here is going to be so interesting for you. And what he does is contract negotiations. Now, before you put your hands on your head and say, oh, contract negotiations, there's so many fascinating things about contracts, and life is really all about contracts. So we're going to talk about it today. We're going to go through it, and we're just going to have wonderful time. So let's get started. And first and foremost, Tyler, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dr. Hoven. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. So this is exciting for me because I love business, and I love setting goals, and I love training. The one thing I really don't enjoy so much is contracts, and I'm certainly not trained like you are to look at them and going through all that stuff. But like we talked about at the intro, contracts are an important part of every part of life, right? Not just what you're doing, but give me a little background about contracts.
Yeah, so it's, as you said, it really governs pretty much every aspect of our life. When you sign up for Facebook, you click that little box that says, I agree to these terms and use. That's a contract between you and Facebook. For what all the attorneys here at Ramos Law do, they handle insurance claims. That's a contract between the insured and the insurer, the insurance company. And certainly in what I do is, for my company, we sell products. We're a software company at Alteryx Incorporated, and the contracts will govern the relationship between the parties. So we're selling to a customer. The contract's going to set out the terms of use, any restrictions that we put on the customer. You can't use it in this way. You can't use it to break the law, for instance. And also, obviously, a bit more legal terms like indemnification, limitations of liability, and so on. The other side of it, as well as an entity, we need services and products as well. And so I'm sure a lot of companies and individuals are familiar with Microsoft Office. That's obviously probably the most prevalent productivity suite. You need a contract with Microsoft to be able to use those products. And it's sort of the flip side of what we're doing. They put restrictions on us for what we can and can't do with Microsoft Office. You can't use your Outlook to send spam emails, for instance. That's one of the restrictions in there. And so that's sort of day to day the contract life that I live. But in terms of in-house, there's a lot more broader roles in terms of just like you said, managing the business. Obviously, an entity is formed by articles of incorporation, and those are kind of the rules that govern what an entity can do and how it should interact. And obviously, there's laws in each state that govern those things. And so also, not particularly my role, but within my company, the corporate counsels, as opposed to the commercial counsel that I am, they handle sort of that aspect of running the business in accordance with the laws. Additionally, because we are a public company, there's SEC restrictions that we have to follow, filing our quarterly statements with our financial statements and so on. And so it's really about making sure the business is running how it should be, making sure that from a risk perspective, the business is not taking on risks that could potentially make the business go under, and then ultimately selling products and facilitating those transactions to bring in the revenue.
So what you just described is a mouthful, and there's a lot there in one company and one business. And I think as we go through the conversation, it's going to be interesting for the Joe Q public that doesn't necessarily work in something like what you're talking about. I think there's going to be a lot to learn about principles that we can all use, and while we're learning at the same time what you're doing at the macro level, so to speak. And so when I was looking at some of the information about you, you're called commercial counsel.
Yep.
And I think you've just described that to us in the sense that as commercial counsel, as an attorney that does commercial counsel, it's contract work, but it's also helping understand how the business works on the productivity side, the receivable side. There's just a lot about that where you're kind of a business specialist attorney. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I mean, one of the reasons why I decided to go to law school was I really enjoyed the business aspect. So my undergrad degree is in finance. I wanted to be able to utilize that degree while also utilizing a law degree as well. And so naturally, it's that doesn't lend itself so much to doing what this firm does, what Ramos Law does, going and advocating on behalf of injured clients, for instance. But just being in general a business person. And like you said, being a part of those conversations of, okay, we've got a really big deal here on the line, but it will require us to take on a little bit more risk than maybe we're comfortable with. So it's about balancing those issues and ultimately advising the people, the ultimate decision makers of those risks and sort of weighing that risk benefit.
So it's a really big advisory role for like you say, the decision makers. I'm interested in, if we now go back in time, you were a business major in college, finance.
Yep.
And prior to that, when you were a young man coming up through junior high, elementary, high school, did you know that you wanted to be more in business from family type stuff, or did you always know that you wanted to go into law school through business? Take me through that.
Yeah, so it's honestly it's quite funny because like with my wife Madeline, who's here, you may have seen her podcast or video.
They were great.
Yep.
She and Jessica, they're Batman and Robin.
Absolutely. So a big mentor, a big legal mentor for me was actually her stepdad, Matt LaFaso, and he owns his own personal injury firm back in Louisiana, where we're from. And so I kind of, when it became time to start applying for college and thinking about that aspect of my future, I thought, hey, I like what he does. He's got a really nice lifestyle. He owns his own business. He can obviously manage his workflow. He can take on as many clients or as few clients as he wants to. And I really like that aspect of not only being an attorney and helping folks, but obviously running your own business as well. And so I knew sort of, I had it in the back of my mind of going to law school, not really knowing what type of lawyer I'd want to be, but went into undergrad with the mindset of wanting to get into business somehow. And so I started, I think, in accounting, and then took a few finance classes, and I thought, well, finance is a bit more interesting. It's more about how do you make money and how do you allow your money to make money for you, rather than accounting is more kind of retroactive of looking back, like
what to do with the money.
Yeah, this is how much money we made, in the past 3 months, 12 months, what have you. So it was a bit more kind of forward looking and kind of doing a lot of analysis, which I really like the math aspect of, more so trying to model out, like, this is what we can do, this is what we'll need to do, this is what we'll need to earn if we want to finance a new wing to our building or add on a new product line and things like that. So
now, did you have businesses growing up? Were your family entrepreneurs, or?
No, I think it was mostly just Matt, seeing him like operate the business and kind of be his own boss. And so I think it was that aspect of kind of having that business as like your baby, essentially, of like, you get to sort of make it how you want to make it, do what you want to do. And I think naturally with becoming an attorney, like it's perhaps different from a doctor where you go into different specialties. With being a lawyer, you graduate, you can become a criminal lawyer, you can become an in-house counsel, personal injury lawyer. Like it's not so specialized. There are some kind of niche areas that require specialization, but for the most part, like, the world is your oyster in a sense.
That's awesome. I got to ask you something.
Yep.
When we've talked many, many times with guests on this show, and almost every time there are people in their lives that have played critical roles in seminal moments that have led to them creating greatness. And you've mentioned now a couple of times that, your father-in-law
Yep.
was that person for you. Have you told him that? Does he know the important role that he played as a mentor and example, and kind of that rock or pillar that you were moving towards?
Yeah. I don't know that I've explicitly told him. I mean, I feel that kind of for both Maddie and me, like, becoming lawyers, being the only sort of legal natured people, and certainly in my family and even in hers, since it's her stepdad, I think he kind of understands that. But yeah, I'm sure he would definitely appreciate being explicitly told, just because I mean, he's the type of guy, obviously in the personal injury line, like always looking out for other people. And I feel like that was very much his mindset with me, especially as I got into law school, because I went to law school in Louisiana. And so that's where all of his legal connections were. And so if I had an interview coming up, 9 times out of 10, he knew the people that would be interviewing me, so he could give them a call, and certainly helped me get a few of my sort of in law school internships and so on. So I think
cool.
he recognizes that he played a big part, but his mindset is very much like, you did all of the work. Like, I kind of helped facilitate some things, but it was very much like all your hard work and determination. So he's kind of a humble and pushes everything away in that regard.
I'll tell you, as a guy now who has gone down life's pathways and done some things and had some great mentors, one of the best things I did one day, it was the start of a new year several years back, and I just went back through my life and I said, man, who has been really important to me in these moments? And it started with the farthest back I went was my high school football coach. Mm-hmm. And then I went to a professor, and I went to a mentor, a contemporary with me. And I just had this list of people, and I wrote or called every single one of them. And the things that did for me by just sharing that with them was so fantastic. And what it gave them was acknowledgement, even though they'd never needed it, never asked for it. But the fact that, now all these years later, even to my high school football coach, it just really opened up some really cool things. So I would encourage you to do that, because it would come out of total left field. Yeah. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, it's just going to make him, if it does anything like it did for those folks, and when people have done it for me, I'm telling you, it's a game changer. So
when I understand that, because like, Maddie and I have obviously younger family members, cousins, and so on, that we try and pass down that information, because at least on my side, like my brother, who's older than me, was the first one to go to college, and then it was me. And then so we've sort of tried to set the bar for our younger, not siblings, but basically siblings, and taken on that mentorship role of like just showing them, this is what you can do. One of them is in pharmacy school right now, and while it's not exactly the same as law school, you're learning very different things. The nature of graduate school is that it's very rigorous. It's going to be very time consuming. You have to be fully committed. And so being able to pass on those things of like, this is completely normal that you're studying, 8 to 10 hours a day and going to class, the other, another 8 hours or so. So it's been nice, and just hearing the feedback from them, and having them say thank you, even if it's just a phone call, thanks for calling and talking about that. So certainly understand from that perspective, and definitely see how, on the other side, someone like Matt would definitely appreciate that.
That's so cool. The fact that you guys are already in that space to help the younger folks, because what we've seen so many times, whether it be from the conversation you and I are having just like this, or on the other side, when you look at folks that are underprivileged, no matter what, what race, color, creed, religion they are, when you look at their family traits, oftentimes it's just lineage passed down, right? Someone has to break the cycle. And like you said, your brother was the first one to go to college, and then you, and now you guys have created a new template and a new way to go. That's got to feel good to you. Yeah,
and I mean, it's always come from a mindset that Maddie and I share, and it's, there's room for everybody to thrive. Like, I'm not competing with my cousin. Like, any sort of, if you want to call it institutional knowledge or wisdom that we pass down, it's not going to like hurt me that he's going to be bettering himself. And just like you mentioned, whether it's, within your own family or within the broader community, I still think that principle holds true, that there's room for everyone to thrive and succeed. And so it's, I have no issues with taking on wisdom. Obviously, I'm still relatively young, though starting to feel the effects of getting a bit older. And so recognizing that there's room for me to grow and still things for me to learn, but also that in my path up to this point, I've learned quite a lot, and those things I can pass down to people that were, that are in the same stage that we were in just a few short years ago.
That's so beautiful. And coming into your work, I can hear the passion. We talked for a few minutes before we went on air, the passion that you have for what you do with, with the teams that you work with and your clients and the decision makers. All of this stuff requires a certain amount of attention to detail, and it requires caring, and it requires excellence. Those are all characteristics of greatness that you can use in any field. I'm interested for you, what is it that makes you crazy about contracts? So is there something about that, the language, the detail, what is it that makes you just thrive in that environment?
Yeah, there's definitely a couple things there. For me, it's I've always been really into puzzles. And really what a contract negotiation is a big puzzle, right? So we obviously, if we're selling our products, we have our standard form contract that we know like the back of our hand. We wrote it, we drafted it, we've edited it multiple times, and we pass that along to the customer, and they say, no, we can't agree to these payment terms, for instance. They're too short, like our payment cycle is much longer, so we need longer payment terms. We also can't agree to or we need to be able to have our affiliated entities use your products under this contract as well. And so really, what that does is we kind of keep a mental checklist, right? Like they're requesting one thing here that's maybe a tick on the other side that we need to try and claw back in another area. And so it's very much like a balancing act, right? If you think of the scales of justice, it's not quite that poetic, but it's very much a balancing act in that, if you take from one side of the equation, you've got to put it on the other side of the equation. And so maybe we're willing to extend the payment terms for this customer, but we're also going to require them to have maybe a bit more risk associated with the contract.
Is that what you love? Do you love the give and take? Do you love the fact of, like, is the ultimate goal for you in a contract, and obviously it's to get the best deal for your side because that's who you're supposed to represent, but the emotional fulfillment, whatever that side, is it winning, and I use air quotes for those listening, to get the best deal for you guys, or is it to create more deals because you can be reasonable and you can have, and maybe we can even talk about this, a win-win. Is a win-win ever really possible in your mind from your perspective? So maybe two-part question there.
Yeah, I think, a win for me, especially on the sales side, is getting the deal done, because obviously the customer is king, right? The customer is the one with the checkbook, the golden rule. The person with the gold makes the rules, and so we're subject to that a little bit, in that they have, they're trying to give us their money, and so they feel that they can sort of dictate the terms of the deal. Now, naturally, there are some limitations in that. With respect to how our products are made, there are some things that, because we're a public company, we can't do. And so there are some internal restrictions or some guardrails that we have. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the nice thing about what I do and why I like it so much, and it's sort of why what I do is radically different from what everyone here at Ramos Law does, is both sides want to get the deal done. On the customer side, they're coming to us because they have a need for our products and solutions. We obviously want to sell and make money on it. And so it's very much, it's both sides working together. Now, naturally, there is some tension between both sides, because we don't want to give up the farm, and neither does the customer. And so naturally, you really sort of slide towards the middle, and it's very much a compromise. So I think in the sense is, a win-win, in that both parties get what they want, but it's very much a compromise in that you're not getting everything that you wanted 100%. You try and get as close to 50-50 as possible. Naturally, when I'm representing the company and we're selling, we want to be a bit more, maybe 70-30 if we can, but obviously that depends on the customers. And on the flip side with the vendors, it's kind of the same as well. If we're buying something, we want to get the best deal, and we can, in that position, we're the one with the gold, right? So we can try and dictate as much as we can, which gives a unique perspective for me doing both. Naturally, I hear the arguments on both sides, and so hey, that's a really good argument for why we need to increase payment terms, or take from one side and add to the other.
So how do you, maybe you can give our audience, because again, so that people get it, we're all engaged in contracts every single day. It might be a contract with a gym. It might be the contract with our spouse called marriage, or with our kids called parenting, or, there's all these different contracts. How important or what tips might you have for negotiating fairly? Are there tactics, and I don't mean tactics in a get over on you way, but are there things that you look for as a professional when you're doing a deal that you would share that could be applied across any domain with respect to negotiating? How do you do it fairly, professionally, and to make sure that you get the best deal possible?
Yeah, I think it goes back to just recognizing that you're not always going to get everything that you want. And so I think going in with that mindset of like, we need to get to a point where, and I had a mentor tell me this, the can you sleep at night test, basically, when it comes to risk, like, is the risk involved? Like, are you going to be able to sleep at night signing that contract, whatever it is? If it's, for $100 million, like, are you going to be able to sleep at night knowing that you've got to pay that all up front in installments? Like, and so really it's just ultimately comes down to your own comfortability. A lot of times, especially, in my role, it's, we shift that risk analysis to the business. We can point it out and say, hey, look, this is what we're seeing in the contract. This is what we advise. But if this deal really means that much to you, then like, if you can sleep at night accepting these terms, kind of thing.
So emotion still plays an important role in a deal, like how you feel about it versus just the mechanics of, like you say, you're advising, saying, man, there's a lot of risk here, but if it's what you really need to do, so do we have to look at applying emotional deal versus the litmus test of, can I survive a worst case scenario of this situation?
I think a little bit. Obviously, what we do is try and predict that worst case scenario, and so a lot of it is like, hey, this is the absolute worst case scenario. Can you live with that? Obviously, nobody wants to go through, sign a deal and then ultimately like do something to breach that deal, whether it be failing to pay, or as a software company, if our product were to stop working all of a sudden, like we're agreeing to provide the product. We never intend for that to happen, but the reason we have the contract is in case those things happen. And so it really is about like, this is the worst case scenario. Can you live with that? Recognizing that in reality, like the risk of that actually happening, the probability of that happening may be quite low. And so while the potential outcome is very high, the probability is quite low. And so there is a balancing. It's, I try and think in numbers, going back to sort of my undergrad, thinking of things in terms of numbers. And so being able to put a value on, I think the risk is 30% of this actually happening and it being, quite substantial, or, it could be much higher. Like, but it just depends on, what type of deal it is. Like, obviously, if you're buying a house, right, there's not a lot of room to negotiate. Those things are pretty standard at this point. Between businesses, there's a little bit more flexibility, because like I said, both sides want to ultimately make a deal.
Yeah. And so if an individual is going into a contract, let's just say a real estate deal, ideally they're going to have a professional realtor or real estate attorney on their side, and then you have the seller that has that same kind of thing. They're going to be watching out for that. In the case where people are going into an agreement on their own, it's a low-level agreement, but it might be big for them.
Yep.
Is there certain things that people should really watch out for? For example, you mentioned earlier payment terms, or interest rates, or hidden fees, or what happens if you miss timely payments? Is there things that if someone's trying to do their own contract at a basic level, not near where you're at, that they should really pay attention to when they're going into, maybe even it's a rental agreement, they're going to go rent a home or rent a car?
Yeah, I think it's, it's kind of a cop out to say, like, you really have to read the whole thing. And you know, a lot of times it'll be sort of boilerplate legalese that's very dense, hard to get through. But I think what a lot of folks have been trying to do in the profession is really just say what you want to do. And I actually had a mentor say that's kind of the good thing about being a contract attorney is you get to say, you get to kind of create the law between the parties. And so really the most like fundamental thing is just to read the contract and see, because a lot of times it'll say, you know, your payment is due on the 1st of every month. If we don't receive it by the 5th of every month, you know, we have the right to evict you, or we have the right to accelerate the rest of the payment schedule. And so those types of things you can figure out. Obviously, if you're having to pay money, that's going to be really important to you. And so you might key in on those aspects of like, what happens if I miss a payment? Is there a grace period that I have before they come and repossess my car, kick me out of my apartment or my rental home or what have you? And the unfortunate thing in those instances, if you're dealing with like an apartment company, you don't have a lot of leverage, right? They'll just go to the next person that's willing to sign, maybe without even reading it. But it's worth asking the question, you know, the famous Wayne Gretzky quoted by Michael Scott quote of you miss 100% of the shots that you never take. It never hurts to ask those questions. And so if you see something that maybe you're uncomfortable with or you're not quite sure what it means, like just ask either the other party or seek help. A legal advisor or even a business person may be able to help you say, yeah, that doesn't look quite right. Maybe you want to get a professional to take a look at it.
Ooh, I like that one. Is if you feel like you're in water that's too deep, it's worth it to spend the money so that you don't have to spend money later.
Exactly.
What about getting out of contracts? I know that one big example is timeshares.
Yep.
You know, there are businesses that their whole business model is getting people out of timeshare contracts that they've entered into. A contract's an interesting thing, and I don't know how much you know about sports contracts. I know very little, but I know that these players and some sports have more leverage than others to say my contract means what it means. You're paying me on one side, but on the other side, if I want to trade, I'm going to get traded.
Yep.
The same thing if you have a guaranteed contract for the money versus a performance. So the NFL is known for incentive-based contracts, whereas baseball, hey, money's yours, right? So all of that kind of stuff. When do you know, like, I get to or I need to walk away from this?
Yeah, and that's obviously one of the critical pieces that we look at. Specifically, like when we're selling software, some of the accounting rules dictate that you have to be able to go in for like a full term, like a full 12-month period or whatever the term is. And there's a clause that a lot of customers will try and negotiate. We certainly try and negotiate when we're buying things, and it's the right to terminate for convenience. So basically, you can terminate the contract at any point during the life of the contract for any reason or for no reason at all, and that's certainly the ideal position. A lot of times,
is that the ideal position from you with the vendor where you're paying, but it's not the ideal position for you with a client who's paying you? Or is it ideal position from your perspective for both those parties?
When we're buying, when we are the customer, that is the ideal position because it gives us the right. If we don't like the vendor, if we don't like the product, the service, what have you, we can get out of the contract, and we don't have any future payment obligations or any other obligation. When we're the vendor, when we're selling to customers, that's where I was sort of going with the accounting rules, is that we're not allowed to what's called book the revenue, basically account for that revenue if they have a right to terminate for convenience, because we may not ultimately be able to capitalize the full value of that contract.
So do you allow that to happen then in those cases, or do you say, hey, no, we can't do that because of the accounting rules and because of all that? So if you ask us as the customer, you say, hey, I want easy out potential. You say, we'd love to give it to you, but we can't. Is that kind of what?
And I think a lot of folks understand that, or a lot of businesses understand that, and it's something that we push for on the vendor side. And I think it's like a specific type of software company that's subject to those accounting rules. And so it's not every instance that those rules apply. And so in the terms of what we sell, it does apply. And so it's a hard no from our customers. On the vendor side, it really just depends on what they're offering. If it's catering services, maybe that's not quite a big deal to the catering company. If we break the contract in the middle of the term for no reason, they'll just go and find another business to cater to or what have you. So it's interesting you bring up the sports contracts, so because those are some of my favorite, honestly.
They are? Ooh, let's talk about sports contracts.
Yeah, specifically the coaching contracts, right?
Okay.
And this is something I've seen folks on the internet try and negotiate these in terms of their employment contracts, but the best one is these huge buyout clauses, right? So going back to being able to terminate the contract early, if you have a coach who's on, say, a 5-year deal for X number of $1 million per year, if the school, the team, what have you, terminates that contract, they still have to pay the remainder of the contract, even though the coach isn't performing the services. And so it's
so their money's guaranteed.
Yeah, absolutely. If they negotiate those buyout clauses, which at least in college football, not so sure about the NFL, that's become the standard. Famous LSU with Coach O. I'm sure folks may be familiar with the amazing 2019 season. 2 very horrible years later, Coach O gets fired, and they have to pay him something like $17 million to not coach.
Yes.
For LSU. And so that's something ultimately I'd like to negotiate on my behalf, is like, hey, if you fire me, you still got to pay me.
Yeah, it's the ultimate deal, the ultimate
exactly.
win-win, right? For you, double win.
Yeah, my boss was not too keen on offering that at this time, but I'll keep pushing for it.
Keep working on that. So is getting an exit strategy a critical part of every contract, of knowing what the exact details are, and if the things aren't working, how you're going to get out, how long it takes, how much it costs? That's something that everyone should look at?
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. You never want to be tied down for life. And even, a termination for convenience is obviously is critical if you want the flexibility to get out at any point. Usually every single contract that I've worked on has a termination for cause section. And that gives you the right, if the other party breaches the contract, does something wrong, like if we have a contract where you're going to pay me maybe to be your attorney and you don't pay me, I can terminate that contract because you've breached the agreement. You didn't perform your obligation, and so we're just going to cancel this contract. And so that normally exists in every agreement, in every contract, the right to terminate for cause. And it could be the failure to pay. It could be, I'm not performing services. You're calling me every day, a few times a day, and I'm not returning your calls. I'm not doing anything. I'm not representing you in any capacity. I'm not providing you a service. I'm not performing my obligations, and so you would have that right to terminate. And usually, it's the way it's structured is you have a cure period, and so. In the case of non-payment, right, you haven't paid me. I'm going to send you a letter that says, hey, your bill was due on the 1st. It's now the 15th. I still haven't received any money from you. If you don't pay me in another 15 days, I'm going to terminate the contract. And so usually it'll be structured like we have to give notice of the breach or the alleged breach, and then give a period, usually 30 days, sometimes a little bit longer depending on the nature of the contract, to ultimately fix the problem. That's standard, and it sometimes goes a bit further. There are some things that are just extreme breaches of the agreement, material breaches of the agreement that are incurable, right? Like if we're giving confidential information to one of our vendors and they release that confidential information to the public, we can terminate that contract immediately because... Or
like criminal activity.
Yeah, exactly. You can't sort of unring that bell of releasing our confidential information, right?
Yeah.
That's irreparable harm that can't be fixed. You can't sort of claw that confidential information back.
And do you see that oftentimes, like in some of the contracts I've read, I've noticed that it'll say, hey, this contract can be breached if this, if this, if this, if this, if this. And so sometimes I've seen it say that those are the rights of the writer of the contract. And then in another section, it's the rights of the signer of the contract. And a lot of that stuff will be similar, but sometimes I've had to go back and like, oh, hold on a minute. If you're asking that of me, then I expect that of you. Isn't that fair? Like, is that something that commonly happens in contracts?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of working to that 50-50 median. Naturally, like our contracts are going to be more favorable to us as a starting point, recognizing that there may be, instances where we can, we can bend or maybe be a little bit more flexible. And every vendor that I negotiate against is the same way. Like it may be completely one-sided where they're getting everything and we're getting nothing, or it may be a little bit towards the middle. And so what we're trying to do is ultimately, at least on the purchasing side, bring it towards the middle, or if we can, a little bit more favorable to our side. And on the selling side, obviously trying to keep that favorability on our side as well.
So what about when you mentioned that when you used a term that was interesting to me, when you're going with another side and you're negotiating against them, and that just rang a bell in my mind. I'm sure there comes time where you negotiate with someone who you've become friendly with and maybe you're friends. Is there a different outlook when you have a personal relationship, or does that help or hinder a typical contractual negotiation?
I think it just comes down to knowing who you represent. Like it certainly helps if you're friendly with the other side. Like I'm sure, with Maddie and some of the other attorneys here, if they're friendly with opposing counsel, then maybe opposing counsel is willing to give a little bit more or sort of push their client a little bit more than if you just don't get along at all. And so I think you see that a little bit. In that, it's not so much like you're completely giving away everything, because you still have to represent the best interests of your client. But it does sort of help maybe remove a few rounds of negotiations. It's like, okay, look, this is our, you can kind of
We've done this before.
Yeah, you can get to the bottom line a little bit quicker and not have to sort of go through every line of the contract and say, yeah, this is what we need here. This is what we need here. It's like, hey, this is the deal we've done in the past. Let's pretty much replicate that here.
That's so smart. In some of the deals that I've done that are, again, just me with someone else on something, I've always found that if I have an understanding of what their real wants and needs are, and we talk it through before we do the contract, then all of a sudden, now it's just details. Like for example, when we do an offer letter here, I don't ever send an offer letter before I've talked to that person. I understand. I tell them exactly what to expect. And I said, hey, now I'm going to send you an offer letter. That is the contract, so to speak. And if there's anything that you see that we haven't talked about or anything that you want to discuss before you sign it, then get it back to me. So in small type deals, small being compared to what you do, I think that could be a really beneficial strategy in a lot of cases, because that way, I think people, when you're not really akin to it, people take contracts personally.
I think that's often the case, especially in like an offer letter, right? Like you could feel slighted if maybe you feel you're worth something, and maybe it was like mentioned or represented somehow of what you may think you're entitled to, and then you get it and you're like, wow, what is this? That kind of starts the relationship off really badly. And especially with something like employment, or if you're, if you're leasing out a house that you own, or whatever the case may be, where you're trying to form a relationship with this person, maybe not a personal relationship, but a business relationship. Like it's still, you want it to go well. Like both parties want the contract to go well. Nobody really intends to,
unless it's a divorce.
Unless it's a divorce, but
that might be different.
But yeah, and so I think it's obviously good to sort of start off on the right foot. Obviously you can't give away all your cards, but there is a certain amount of saying, hey, this is our position here. Like these are some of the tweaks that maybe we can make, but like this is the reason why. And really just being open and honest about the reasons why. I feel like a lot of times when we're negotiating customer contracts, they may not completely understand what we're selling, or maybe like how our product's built, what type of security protocols we have, and so on. And so really just getting the right folks in the room to explain to the other right folks. It may not be attorneys. It may be the information security folks for both sides of saying, hey, this is how secure our products are. These are the protocols that we use, and getting those two speaking the same language, much like the lawyers speaking the same legalese, getting those folks speaking the same language and understanding at a fundamental level, this is what we're doing, what we're agreeing to. We can sort of work out the nitty gritty details, but let's at a broad level sort of get on the same page.
So here's a question. Now it's coming to brass tacks, man. Everyone needs this information. You're going to buy a car.
Yep.
You're going to the dealership. You and I know what's coming up now,
yep.
right? They're going to tell you, you this and this, and the salesman says one thing, and then what happens? They go into the back room, into the finance, and then that person goes to talk to this person. Now you're kind of out of the loop. What should people do to protect themselves or to try not to get taken? And I hate to use that because not all car dealerships are trying to do that, but how can someone negotiate the best deal in a situation like that? What do they look for? Should they be demanding and say all they can say is no? Like, how do you keep pushing to get what's best for you, knowing the contracts at the car dealerships or similar type stuff is going to be what's best for them?
Yeah, I think it's, again, obviously wanting to shoot your shot, right? Whatever you feel that you think is best for you, it doesn't hurt to ask. We had a situation when we bought a car recently, and we had mentioned that we're lawyers, and
I'd hate to do this with you, by the way. I'd feel at such a disadvantage.
Well, the problem is that, again, right, we as consumers against a huge entity, a car manufacturer, a car dealership, don't have the necessary leverage to really move the scale, right? Like, we're not going to say, hey, you've got to give me 30, you got to cut the price in half. Like, they're just not going to do that because they can go to the next person and sell it for $5,000 more than list price or whatever. And so it doesn't hurt to ask. The main thing, especially with buying a car, is because for them, it's all about a numbers game. They're trying to push this many units. I'm confident in this because my brother was actually a car salesman. So we've kind of chatted about this back and forth a lot. It's just be willing to walk away.
How do you determine when that is?
I think you have to do a lot of due diligence at the beginning. Like, obviously, you have to know what the value of the car is, what a reasonable price to pay is. And so if they're listing it in, if you KBB it or, Kelley Blue Book or look it up somehow and figure out, okay, this car is worth $30,000. They're offering it with, all the bells and whistles for $40,000. And all those bells and whistles, if you go build it online, is worth maybe $50,000. That may be a pretty good deal, and you may want to jump on that. Maybe it's the end of the year, they're trying to move the old models out. But it's really about what you're comfortable paying. And I know what my brother did a lot was this is working with their customers of what is your bottom line? What do you want your monthly payment to be? And then ultimately trying to structure the deal that way. And they do some funny business on that, whether it's sort of lengthening the terms or you're going for like an 8-year deal for like a $30,000 car or something like that. Like, maybe it's not going to be worth it or in your best interest down the road. But ultimately just knowing what you're comfortable with doing. Again, it goes back to knowing what you're signing up for. If I'm going to sign up to pay $500 a month for 72 months, like, is that something you really want to tie down to? You do have the ability to sell the car. Like, once you buy the car, that's kind of the transaction done. Obviously, a lot of people will finance the car, and so your relationship then isn't with the car dealership, it's with the bank, or maybe it still is the dealership, but their lender. And so it's about sort of the contract between you and the lending institution at that point. And so really just what you're comfortable with. If you're comfortable paying that amount, you have very good income security. Or maybe it's at the top of your budget and you want to push for a little bit more. And if they're not willing to sort of meet your bottom line, that's when you sort of walk away and say, thanks, but no thanks.
So in any situation, regardless of it's with buying a car or renting a home or purchasing something, I think what I hear you saying is you should either take the time to understand all the variables or have someone in your corner that does, and go into it with an idea of, if I can't get this done, then I need to walk away.
Yep.
Because if I don't, then the risk is too high. Should a worst case scenario happen, I may not be able to withstand it. And that could create a whole bunch of downstream effects. Is that kind of the way you go about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the ultimate sort of bargaining chip that you have, especially if you're buying something, is you have to be able to walk away, right? Because naturally, if you're going to sell me a car and you're saying it's worth $60,000 and I say, no, I'm going to pay, $30,000, right? So there's a pretty big gap between us, and naturally we'll sort of move towards the middle of where we are. It's a lot like, what any settlement negotiation with some of the Ramos law clients. They're trying to get to a number that your attorneys feel is right and appropriate for your clients. The defense is trying to get to a point where they can say, hey, insurance company, yeah, this is a good deal. But ultimately you have to be willing to walk away, because naturally throughout that process you say, no, I will not pay more than $40,000. I will not pay more than $50,000. And then at some point they're just they know they've got you.
Yes.
When you say, okay, if you keep raising the bar, for instance, they know that they've got you.
Yes.
And so that's the thing, is sticking to a number. If your number is 45, like getting to a point, you obviously don't go straight there, but getting to a point where you say 45 is my last best final offer, and if you can't match that, I'm going to walk and go find someone that can.
Yeah.
In the instance of a car, and it's hard in the case of like an apartment, because those things are based on square footage a lot of times, and so it's hard to negotiate those rates. It doesn't hurt to ask, again, going back to that.
Or
that
term
quote.
Or
Yeah,
something.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, we had an instance where we lived in Boulder for a few months, like 3 months, and that was one of the things, is the apartment company didn't offer anything below 12 months. And so we were able to say, hey, look, this is the situation. Like, you've got to be able to do like a month to month, or we have to be able to work this out. Like, we're willing to obviously pay you maybe more than what the yearly rate would be in order to do this. But this is our situation. We simply can't do that. We don't need a 12-month lease. We're only going to be here for a couple of months. So it's really just about talking through those things, and hoping that you get someone on the other side that's willing to make a deal, which in my profession, like in a lot of business to business deals, like that's the case. Like, both sides want to make a deal. It's usually the case that the business stakeholders are mad at the attorneys because we're arguing over the nitty gritty details, and they just want to be able to use the product, or start utilizing the service. But it's those details that, like you said, if worst case happens, that's what we're trying to protect against.
Yes. Okay, so super important question. What do you think about Lamar Jackson trying to negotiate his deal with the Baltimore Ravens? You think that's going to get done? And a guy trying to negotiate his own deal at that level?
Yeah, it's definitely tough, because, and granted, I haven't been following it too closely. I know sort of what the issues are on both sides. And really it's about, I think in that case, like being able to go with the give and take, right? Of like, hey, we may be willing to give you more guaranteed money, but like maybe your incentives have to come down. Like if we win the Super Bowl, maybe we can't pay you, I don't know what a reasonable bonus for winning the Super Bowl for a starting quarterback would be, but maybe we can't pay you what we would pay Russell Wilson if he won the Super Bowl, but maybe it's, one of the lower tier quarterbacks, maybe it's what their bonus is. And so I think it's just the knowledge of the contract structure. Obviously the agents exist for a reason. They know how to negotiate those deals on behalf of their clients. And it's a lot of that give and take of, hey, we want the guaranteed money and we're willing to bend somewhere else. And maybe that's something that Lamar might not be able to articulate as well, because he doesn't quite know the structure as
and
well.
Especially if he's so engaged in saying what other guys are making, right? Because you always want to set the market and this kind of thing. And he says, well, wait, on one side, look what I've done. And on the other side, the best ability is availability. Yep. And you haven't been available. And so when you go back and forth on this, it's interesting. And it's just fascinating of a guy of that stature that could pay an agent decided not to. Makes me wonder. So I thought I'd get your thoughts on it.
It's a nice show of confidence. And I mean, you don't get to that level without being confident.
For sure.
But it's, it's also the case that he's not asking his agent to step in for him and play quarterback. And so at some point, especially with the amount of money involved, like you want to make sure that those nitty-gritty details that we keep going back to are in place and are exactly what you want. Because like you said, if he gets hurt, what happens? Obviously from the team's perspective, they feel that they shouldn't have to pay someone who's not performing their side of the contract, being the starting quarterback. But I know it's a little bit different in those cases. But it is fascinating to sort of see how it plays out. And ultimately, I'm sure they'll get something done, because I know the Ravens certainly want him. He does have the leverage of maybe going elsewhere. Maybe he doesn't.
Well, they did sign Odell Beckham Jr. Maybe that's of course, unless he says, well, you gave that guy my money. So, But anyway, lots of fun stuff to talk about. So if I were boiling this episode down, I would say that when going into a contract, look at it. And if you don't understand it, get an advisor. Make sure you know the details of what the key points are. Because like you say, a lot of boilerplate information. Understand what a worst case scenario is and can you live with it. Know where your walkaway points are, and look to see how if a personal relationship can kind of make this thing easier. That would be kind of my takeaways from what you shared with me. Is there any other key notes that you would say when entering into a contract with someone that you should pay attention to?
I think just be open-minded, because you may go in thinking that you have all the answers, and oftentimes, like in the negotiations that I do, it boils down to a handful of clauses, but there are multiple ways that you can go about achieving something just using the wording. And so it may be the case that you're thinking like, okay, no, I don't want to pay everything all up front, or I don't want to, whatever the case may be. There could be multiple ways to sort of to make that happen, to make the deal happen, and get the same point across. And so I think just being open-minded, understanding that not everything has to be done the way it's been done in the past. There are some other options that could be available. And so just thinking through those things, and obviously talking with the other side. It's not the case that usually it's not the case, or hopefully it's not the case, that one party's trying to take advantage of another. Sometimes is, but usually they're both trying to get the deal done. And so I think it's more so that you're trying to be aligned as best as possible. Naturally there is that tension, but ultimately you both want to get the deal done. So just work together as best you can.
Love that. One last question for you. If you were thinking back on your life to this point, is there one piece of advice that you've either learned or been given that has really helped shape who you are that you would want to pass on to our audience?
I think just, I know it's been said a lot, but really that, there's really nothing that you can't achieve, right? We've seen it. I mentioned with my brother and me being the first to go to college, me being the first to go to graduate school, and really sort of going at it for the most part alone and trying to figure those things out, and really just making sure that that you don't allow yourself to get into your own way. And really one of the things that I've sort of passed on to my cousins, as I mentioned, is for us, that was moving to Colorado. Like we loved coming out here to ski. We loved when we lived here over the summer. We really wanted to be here. And so that was our ultimate goal, was moving to Colorado. And we set our sights on that, and we just were full speed ahead at making sure that we achieved that. And so I always tell my cousins, like, find your Colorado. Like it doesn't, you don't have to move up here, but find something that you're that passionate about and just go at it full steam. And really at that point, nobody can stop you but yourself. And as long as you don't get in your way, then really anything's possible.
Beautiful. Tyler, anything is possible. Thank you so much for your time today, for your expertise and your wisdom on contracts. If someone wanted to learn more about contracts, or they want to learn more about you, how would they best connect with you?
Certainly on LinkedIn. I think that would be the best place. Tyler Robbins. I think it should be fairly...
2 B's, correct?
2 B's, yep. And the one that works at Alteryx Incorporated.
And spell Alteryx?
ALTERYX, Alter YX, the YX axis. So a little bit of
clever
wordplay there. But yeah, LinkedIn would be the best place to connect. Certainly be happy to help, and feel free to reach out.
That's awesome. Well, I hope you had a good time. I learned a lot. If you were watching or listening to this and you got your brain stimulated, please pass it to someone else. Even if contracts aren't your thing, it's something to listen to and to learn and to get your thinking, because it's when we think, we act, and then we make a difference. So Tyler, thanks for coming here. Look forward to hearing about continued success for you and seeing you around here more often too, especially with a little baby coming.
Absolutely.
All right. Have a great day, my friend. Okay.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.